Hello, hello and welcome. I'm Antoine Selim Bilgin from European Schoolnet. And what about you? As in the previous webinars, we would like to know who is joining us today. So if you can go to menti.com and tell us what type of stakeholder are you, then we can get to know better how each profile is being represented today. And who knows, maybe I can do a formative assessment. And let's say if I see many school leaders joining us today, then I can apply my presentation differently to adapt to them. So please go to menti.com with the code 569587 and 2. And then in a bit, I will check the answers. So once again, welcome to the Assisted Learning Final Conference. This is a webinar it's a series of 3 webinars. And we've already had the previous 2 ones, and today is the last webinar of the conference. On Monday, we talked about the Assisted Learning Project and policy experimentation in general, and we looked at the results of the field trials where we tested the Digital Formative Assessment Toolkit. On Wednesday, we looked in detail to the dialogue labs where we built a community of knowledge exchange and discussions where different voices came together, including students, where they talked about their view of digital formative assessment and also learning and assessment in general. And today, I will present to you in more detail what the toolkit is about, give you some examples of the content, and suggest ways on how we can use this toolkit in the future. If you haven't checked the previous webinars, I strongly recommend that you check the recordings we put on YouTube, because there were very interesting discussions and very interesting insights shared in those webinars. But if you have already attended those, then please fill out the feedback forms so that we know in the future how we can improve things. These slides, of course, will be shared with you, and you will be able to use these links on the slides as well. All right, today I'm not alone. We have 2 teachers from Portugal, Anna and Isabel, who are going to share their experiences of the toolkit in this project. And then Janet Looney, the director of the European Institute of Education, will put the Assisted Learning Toolkit back in the European policy perspective and share her views on the implications for European policy for digital formative assessment. I have my colleagues, Alex and Milena, helping out with chat moderation, and also Andrea, my colleague, who is behind the scenes orchestrating the webinar. For those who haven't joined the previous webinars, very briefly, Assisted Learning was a policy experimentation project that tested the impact of a systemic digital formative assessment toolkit on schools, and it also investigated the views of education stakeholders, including students, on DFA and learning and assessment in general. In other words, there were 2 strands in this project. One strand was the quantitative strand, where we had the randomized control trial. So we had a group of schools that tested the toolkit as the test group, and then another group of schools that were the control group that didn't get to use the toolkits at first. But at the end, we compared these 2 groups in terms of their attitudes, their knowledge, and their behavioral tendencies related to digital formative assessment. Then there was the qualitative strand, where we had a series of 35 dialogue labs, where we built a community of exchange, and education stakeholders, including students, shared their views, and they thought about the challenges to assessment in general and also DFA. And this helped us put the results from the quantitative research into perspective and get a deeper understanding of the views of each stakeholder. Now, for the topic of today. Actually, I'm the lucky one here today because I've seen the previous webinars and I could see the discussions going on in there. So I have the chance to build upon those discussions here today. For example, on Wednesday, many participants were talking about how it is, or it can be difficult to engage students in formative assessment practices, especially in the context of high stakes exams and graded tests. And there, Professor Janet Elwood commented that it is important to show things by doing them. And this reminded me of the first time I get to know formative assessment, which was pretty late in my life, actually. I was already in my 20s doing my master's. But anyway, there they asked us to write a research proposal. And we were told that it's not the professor who is going to assess them, but there will be a peer assessment. So I received feedback from my classmates, and I didn't really agree with them. I felt criticized, and I didn't see the point at first. It's only when I started reviewing the work of others that I realized how this can be beneficial, because I started thinking about criteria for what makes a research proposal good or bad, and then I thought back of the feedback I got. So in the end, I was able to implement some actions to improve my own work, and things actually got better. And then I remembered what I learned better in the long run as well. The point of that exercise was not to get an accurate assessment. The point of it was to engage students in self-reflection and self-regulation. And this is one of the many ideas we try to convey in the toolkit. Now, before I go on further, I could maybe take a quick look at the profile of our participants. So if Alex hears me, I can ask him to present us the poll results. And if there are people who haven't responded yet, please do so. All right, I can see the poll already. And yeah, it's consistently many teachers joining us in the webinars. And we're happy to see that. As you could choose multiple options, of course, some of us are also parents or teacher trainers and teachers at the same time. I see we also have policymakers today. Well, great. No school leaders, it's not like my example, but I can see that we have multiple groups represented. That's looking great. Please feel free to continue filling the results because we'll get to look back at these when everybody answers. Okay, now I can continue with our slides. And actually, before going further, there's a short quiz question, just a single quiz question that I would like to do because I would like to understand how we distinguish formative and summative assessment. And then I can take a look at the results a bit later to make my point on it. So if you go to menti.com again to check 1891 2899 as the code, you can answer this poll. You'll see the code also in the ticker, and probably my colleagues will also present it in the chat. What was the rationale in developing this toolkit? Well, first of all, both research and implementation projects suggest that investing in continuous professional development in formative assessment is very cost effective. For the little investment we make, we get visible results in student achievement. And developing a toolkit is also cost effective because there is no while there's no active on-site training required, it's in a way a manual, a toolkit that is free for use for teachers. And secondly, when we look at international surveys, and both through personal observations, it seems like formative assessment is not always meaningfully implemented, or that there might be misconceptions. If we look at the most recent TALIS results, only 41% of teachers reported that they ask students to do self-assessment regularly, and only 59% of teachers give written feedback. Well, actually, it's not even regularly. It's only 41% of teachers that do self-assessment, according to the data. This means there's still some room for teachers, other teachers, to implement this. And we also see that sometimes there are misconceptions. For example, formative assessment is thought of simply non-graded tests, or online quizzes, for example, are used a lot as a form of DFA, but there it's of course a good thing to do a quiz at the beginning to activate prior knowledge, but assessment only becomes formative when the teacher or the student actually uses the knowledge from the online quiz, the data from the online quiz, to make conclusions and make decisions for their learning and teaching process. And third, the potential of digital tools do not seem to be fully realized. When we look at the international survey of ICILs, only 11% of the teachers reported using online quizzes regularly, only 7% digital portfolios or concept maps, and only 28% learning management systems. Even for pre-pandemic era, I mean, this data comes from before the pandemic. These are, I find, very low proportions. And also, the fact that these teachers use these tools do not mean that they use it for formative assessment either. And finally, research suggests that it is not enough to change the attitudes or the views of people to change their behavior. In many cases, researchers would say that teachers know what is good for their students, that they know, for example, formative assessment is good for them, but implementing it in class takes extra effort to change your existing routines, and also you need time to prepare, and you need support from other stakeholders. That's why we wanted to develop a toolkit that addresses multiple stakeholders to create this systemic change, to make everyone aware of their role, of their potential role in supporting the adoption of DFA practices. So the toolkit addressed not only teachers, but it also addressed school leaders, students, policymakers, and parents. How did we set out to develop this toolkit? We had many people contributing. So we basically went to representatives of these 5 stakeholders. We had researchers, experts. We talked to teachers, teacher trainers. We talked to school leaders. We interviewed students, and also representatives from parents' organizations. And I haven't included the partners here, but our partners in the project were representing the policymakers. We first started with a literature review that helped us understand the state of the art, the landscape of current research into digital tools used for formative assessment. And this literature review also helped us map the different digital tools and practices to formative assessment and create our own typology of digital formative assessment that we use later in developing the scenarios. Then we interviewed the stakeholders, and we also collected teaching scenario examples and case studies from our partners from 5 countries. Finally, the writing process started. And in parallel, we also had two policymakers reviewing the content. And we had also pilot testers who were three teachers also reviewing the content and giving us feedback before we published it. The toolkit is basically a set of web pages. For each of the stakeholders, there is a single page that introduces the basic concepts of digital formative assessment. But for some actors, we had more material. So for teachers, we have a repository of teaching scenarios. And teachers could also check the glossaries for descriptions of all the terms, concepts, and digital tools mentioned throughout the toolkit. We also, for school leaders and policymakers, offered a gallery of case studies that illustrated actions that enable or support digital formative assessment in many countries. And for school leaders specifically, we also helped them with offering a school positive change toolbox, which provided them guidance for planning their actions if they wanted to implement something new like DFA in their school. For the toolkit, we didn't go for a text-heavy style. We weren't looking to develop a textbook or a manual with loads of text. We rather aimed for a lighter, more inspiring style. Therefore, you can see in the screenshot, arguments were presented briefly, links were provided to support these ideas if necessary. Then maybe there was an interview video, again, introducing a topic like how to give feedback. And you see there's space, lots of spacing, nice colorful visuals. The idea was in one page, they go through it and there's a call to action to do more. If they feel inspired, as a teacher, for example, they can decide to check the teaching scenarios or talk to their school leaders or colleagues and so on. The style of each page was different depending on the stakeholders. For example, for policymakers, there was more emphasis on research evidence, while for parents and students, the content was lighter and more inspirational. To communicate the ideas in the toolkit, we used infographics, cartoons, animations, and interviews, again, to have a lighter, well, to diminish text, but diversify the modes of communication of ideas. And we also had the help of two cartoon artists, Jofi Lang, who helped us with drawing the infographics, and Maxim Zeehagen, who contributed with very nice cartoons. Now I will give some examples from the toolkit content for each stakeholder. And sometimes I will use examples from scenarios or examples coming from interview videos. Starting with the teachers, I would like to ask you, and if you like, you can write it in the chat as well. Why do we need to assess? Why do we need to assess students? Well, we need to assess students because we need to check whether they learn something, because we tend to lose focus, we tend to forget. For example, in this webinar, you will probably remember the first part and the final part better than other parts. That's how the mind works. And we don't retain everything that we learn. Like Dylan Williams says, if students learned everything that we taught them, we wouldn't need to assess. So we need to see the gap between what is being taught and what is being learned, and then make improvements on our method or see how we can close this gap. It's also important to think about assessment beforehand because it makes ideas concrete. When we think about assessing something, we also start thinking about how we will explain it, how we will talk about it. And assessment in general has many purposes. Formative and summative are both necessary. There is no such thing as these being mutually exclusive. And this was the first idea that we tried to explain in the toolkit. We really wanted to differentiate formative and summative assessment, and that it wasn't about the tools, but it's about the process of using the data. So with this, I can now check what were the answers to the poll. Oh, that was very quick. So I see that indeed many people were quite accurate. Yeah, actually, many of you got it right. Maybe the 60% there, putting the number there was well, made it easier as well. I'm not sure, but yeah, there it's clearly that it's not well, it's not a formative statement because it doesn't give well, pointers for next steps. The C, the answer, the option C. So this is really to make the point that even graded tests can be used for making formative conclusions. It's not about the test or the grades, but it's about how we use that data. All right. So for example, a conclusion could be, my students learned most of the English grammar topics I covered today. That would be a summative conclusion. But if I said, the students are having most difficulty with phrasal verbs, that's more of a formative conclusion. To look into some of the answers, well, some of the ideas in the toolkit for teacher side, one idea presented by Dylan William to us was to use multiple correct options when we design a multiple choice question. Because if a student answers, well, chooses all the correct options, then we are more sure that they are choosing the correct answers for the right reasons. And in many scenarios, the idea of detecting common misconceptions is also explored, meaning that you can maybe predict the kind of typical mistakes that students make and then add those typical mistakes in the options of a multiple choice question, and that would help you address them later. Another challenge is to, well, have students be okay with making errors. Sometimes it's difficult for a student to accept, to say that they didn't understand or ask a question. Therefore, one method is to use traffic lights or other symbols and define what those symbols mean. So if I understand means I understand and can explain it to a classmate, that makes it clear for the students, and the student can even help another classmate and explain the topic. If the student is worried about asking a question openly, then students can be put in groups and create questions to ask to the teacher as another method. René and Maya are teachers from Denmark, and they told us about these quiz question creation. So students create their own test questions and test each other, and that helps with retention. And again, Dylan William also explains that instead of studying the content, it's good to do a zero stakes self-testing while just doing a quiz at home without the teacher knowing the answer. And actually, while answering questions, students can retain again the information that they learn better. Feedback is a key topic in, well, both digital and non-digital formative assessment. And here we got some also ideas from teachers. For example, teacher Ariana said that to help students learn how to give constructive feedback, she uses graphic organizers very often. The good thing with graphic organizers is that they can easily be adapted to a pen and paper situation without the need of digital tools. And another point by teacher Anna is to use voice recordings to give feedback. Now, this is a very interesting idea because we always see that it's a challenge to keep teacher-student interaction when we are using too many digital tools during class. But if we use a voice recording, then that adds a personal touch because the student gets to hear the vocal cues from their teacher. They hear the voice tone, and it adds a personal element, a social element to the feedback. Anna also says that it's important to debrief with students about anything that the teacher tries in class. It's good to make them feel that their voices are being heard, but it's also important that this makes them think about the processes. Another example by teacher Cornelia is to discuss at the beginning of class the rules for giving each other feedback, or even set goals about what they want to achieve in the class or in the semester even. If rules are clear about that it's okay to give critical feedback or how we are going to deal with errors in class, then students can be more comfortable in being direct and open towards their classmates, and also be more, okay, they will be better to deal with feedback as well. We always talk about clear feedback, that feedback needs to be actionable and clear, but according to Dylan Billiam, he told us it doesn't always need to be clear if it's used as a learning activity. So the teacher checking a written assignment, instead of marking all the mistakes in there, they can instead put clues about where the mistake is and the nature of the mistake. And then the student tries to figure out the rest. And this is again helping to retain what they learned. These are some examples of the ideas from our interviewees. And now I can give a few examples from the scenarios. As you can see, the elements I mentioned are formative assessment practices. So with the teaching scenarios, we try to illustrate how those can be adapted in the context of a digital tool use. We categorized the scenarios into, well, 3 themes. We looked at the tools that are being used, the subjects, and the level of implementation. So this is in a way the difficulty level. We looked at the preparation time foreseen for each scenario. I mean, we tried to categorize them at 3 levels. So for some examples, one example of a scenario talks about co-creating rubrics with students. So the teacher and student together, and using collaborative sheets, online sheets, can help with this process. So a teacher has developed a Google Sheet plugin. This is easily adaptable for grading as well. So students think about the criteria they need to put in, and then they use this for a physical education class. And it's an assessment in groups. So a group of students are carrying out a performance of some, let's say, volleyball activities, movements, and the other group is evaluating them on the rubric. And then they switch roles. Another scenario talks about combining hands-on and digital work. And this we know that using handwriting is good, can be good also when doing calculations and learning writing and grammar. So this mobile app that was also developed by a European project allows the students to take a picture of the math solutions that they did on paper. This photo is then checked by another classmate who compares the photo with the actual solution to the problem. We talk a lot about immediate feedback, And also edtech providers, they would say that their tool is giving students immediate feedback. And that's a good thing. But digital tools is not only good for giving immediate feedback. And there are cases that immediate feedback is not well, I wouldn't say it's not good, but sometimes we need feedback to remain, to be remembered, because students can also forget feedback. But if you use a digital tool like this teacher, who uses just a simple online collaborative document, then the feedback remains. So in this activity, the teacher asks students to do a learning diary, to keep a learning diary every week. And every week, the teacher leaves comments, and those comments remain there. So the student can look back at how they progressed, what were the feedback from last time. And this way they can get to develop their grammar and vocabulary, but they can also reflect on what they did in the week, what they learned in the week. Then the use of concept maps can be very interesting. We appreciate numerical data that comes from online quizzes because it helps us make a quick decision. We look at the dashboard, we see, like I did with the Mentimeter, I see the graphs and I can quickly make a decision about it. But sometimes it's interesting to get a deeper qualitative understanding of how students learn. And with this scenario, students in a physics class learn about different energy types and energy sources, and they connect concepts in a concept map. And the teacher can see how the concept map improves with as the lesson goes. This gives an insight into how students organize their thinking of concepts, and in a longer process, it gives an interesting formative information to teachers. And digital portfolios, for example, can also be used for a richer data from students. These are just some examples from the teacher side. For the other parts, there is less to explain because, as I said, for example, for the students, we were looking for more of a lighter approach. We wanted to, we didn't expect students to sit down and study about the theory and practices of formative assessment, but we wanted to rather inspire them and let them know that their school leaders and teachers are working on this. So we talked to students also because we thought students would be more interested in seeing their peers on the video. So we asked many students how they like to learn. For example, Jan Peter from the Netherlands mentioned that as they were doing these non-graded regular tests, an advantage for him was that at the end, when they had to do the graded exam, he felt like he knows a lot already and he didn't feel like studying a lot last minute for the exam. So this is a good way to show, all these formative assessment activities actually, in the long run, contribute to your grade. And Danish students from the Budinge school, they also talked about how they like competitive elements sometimes in the tests. But also they mentioned that sometimes the purpose of a test is not clear. Sometimes even formative assessment tests can be, the non-graded tests can be stressful, but doing them more often gets them used to the idea of assessing themselves. So these were some messages from students. Then we also explored ideas like asking for clear, informative feedback, both from teachers and students, and that students should set clear goals for themselves. Writing them down helps. And these ideas were explored through cartoons and animations using animals like birds and frogs. For school leaders, they are the third group who actually participated in the field trials. We had 3 school leaders, so Mark and Florian from Netherlands. They talked about their establishing a feedback culture. What they did was to to ask for regular feedback, to have exchange between teachers, students, and the management. So to have this feedback and improvement, always improvement culture. And Michael, who was at the time a school leader at the Buddinge School in Denmark, he talked about how he tried to establish a teacher learning community. So he had teacher ambassadors who supported other teachers in choosing and learning digital tools. And he also tried to deprivatize the classroom, as he would say, which means that teachers tried to be open to being observed while they're teaching by their peers and giving each other feedback. And he explained that he first met with some resistance to this idea, but that's he worked on improving this practice. As I mentioned in the overview, the School Positive Change Toolbox was a page that offers some guidance to school leaders in case they wanted to implement anything new in their school. It doesn't have to be only for digital formative assessment, but here topics like general topics like how to approach resistance to change, how to establish trust. These were explored, and then we offered them a theory of change form. This theory of change was also used in a previous project at European SchoolNet for shared leadership in schools. So basically, it's a form that school leaders can note down their plans, what they want to achieve, why they want to use these actions, why they assume these actions will work, and then what they expect to happen if they implement these actions, and what are the actors that they will reach out. So all these elements, they think through these so that it becomes more concrete in their mind, and they can also challenge the assumptions they have. Are their assumptions just based on evidence, observations, or just is there some bias involved in their thinking, and so on. So there was an animation video that took the school leaders through all the steps in nice visuals. It was like a tutorial video explaining the form. Policymakers weren't part of the field trials, but we also created a page for them. This was more emphasizing the evidence, the research supporting digital formative assessment. So we tried to explain that this can be potentially very beneficial, and that our partners and other policymakers we spoke to, they explained that policymakers should be informed about this further. And there are many questions around the safety of digital tools and the ethics as well, and how teachers and students will be trained in using these meaningfully. So all these questions were brought up in this page. So both for policymakers and school leaders, there was a gallery of 15 case studies from 8 countries. And these are explaining actions that were taken in other schools or at the national or local level that could be potentially beneficial for digital formative assessment. So to give you some examples, for Estonia, there was a case study explaining how schools were organizing regular e-learning days, meaning that students were going back home to work in groups or in their own pace. In Greece, there is the action to offer open source tools and training services at the national level for teachers. In Spain, one case study talks about the use of selfie for assessment of schools and teachers concerning ICT, and also about teacher-developed practices and tools being shared in an online repository. In Finland, one case study went through how local authorities work with teachers and EdTech to introduce digital services in their schools. In the Netherlands, a case study explained the issues of ethics and safety in their country concerning digital tools. and how they developed a privacy agreement that many national digital tool providers adhere to and use when dealing with, well, making agreements with schools. And finally, a Portuguese case study, for example, talks about how they train teachers in many regions in using mobile learning in math. Finally, the final stakeholder were the parents. Here we talked to Martin Schmalzried from COFACE and Esther Salomon from Parents International. They both emphasize that parents need to be informed more about the benefits of formative assessment, that there is still much focus on high-stake exams, and that as parents are not teachers, but they are informal educators in a way because they spend a lot of time with students, with their children, then it can be beneficial to talk about the way students learn things at school in their home. And infographics and animations again went through ideas like having more teacher-student-parent dialogue, parents going to ask teachers how they assess students, like not to interrogate, but to open the discussion in a way, or to be more informed about the ethical aspects of digital tools. This concludes, well, the toolkit. Of course, there's many more to explore. These were just some, let's say, just some ideas, some examples. And the toolkit now is available online. You can check out at our website. I will provide the links at the end. But before I move to Q&A, I just wanted to look at the qualitative data that we collected through two sources. So we had the user comments from the field trial testers, so the teachers, students, and school leaders that were in the policy experimentation. And then we also had many discussions coming out of the dialogue labs that could be relevant, that could have implications for the future of a toolkit or any kind of toolkit-like intervention. So the main 3 points that emerged from the user comments were that, well, many of them asked for ready-to-use teaching scenarios. Indeed, our teaching scenarios were to illustrate the formative assessment practices and the use of digital tools, but they didn't all provide detailed worksheets and teaching material, because we thought that teachers still need to adapt it to their context. But some teaching scenarios could be indeed ready to use right away, and that could maybe help some teachers to get started with less effort. The second point is that teachers said both students and teachers need more time to learn to use the digital tools, which means if a toolkit like this is going to be tested, then it might be that we need to give teachers more time to explore the tools and try something and see the impact. We would need to wait a bit longer. And the third point is that many teachers asked for some guidance, that although we aimed for a light design toolkit, some teachers said that the toolkit was still sometimes difficult to navigate at first, and that they would appreciate a curator or a teacher that or a teacher trainer that guides them through the use of the toolkit. Then from the dialogue labs, one point was that students raised the point that sometimes tests can be poorly designed. So this one way to respond to this could be to have more examples about questions and test design per subject. So what could be some question examples for mathematics and what could be for physics and so on. The dialogue labs also emphasized and Kay and Jeanette on Wednesday also brought this up, that there is this trend of use of artificial intelligence in education, and it is important to understand how the data, the student data, is used, what happens to it. And therefore, the toolkit could address in more detail what are the questions to ask about data use, and what can be done to ensure the safe and meaningful use of data, at least for some digital tools. Then a third point was that digital education, well, if it's used vastly throughout the class, it can lead to a reduction of interaction between teacher and students. This point was raised in other places as well. So the toolkit can also explore this issue. So, for example, that feedback voice recording that I mentioned, this kind of elements can be more explored in the toolkit. And finally, a lack of digital skills, a digital gap, and a lack of digital devices was also mentioned. And this could be the implementation, the implication of this could be that we could include more alternatives, hands-on alternatives of the practices we explained in the toolkit. The toolkit was developed during the pandemic, so there we talked about how to adapt things to a remote teaching condition, but this could also be done for hands-on, non-digital versions of activities. This is my my points to make us start think about implications. In a bit, I will also ask for questions from the floor. But what do you think? Can you tell us, what do you think would be necessary to start implementing DFA in your schools beyond this toolkit or beyond any toolkit? And we can check the answers at the end of the Q&A. You can also see the code in the ticker. All right. Now, are there any questions? See. I see there are some comments.
Hello, Antoine.
Hello.
There are no questions in the chat per se, but we have tens of suggestions of tools that are being used by teachers in our audience. For instance, just picking one example from Emma in Spain, I believe, using Class Dojo's e-portfolio to submit project work, photos and videos that students then can share and in any given subject area. And we have tens of examples like this flowing in the chat. No specific question themselves, but it looks like we can build another compendium of digital tools, just listing those that are in the chat. So let's maybe give a bit some time for the audience to respond to the question you just asked, and for which you can also respond going to menti.com using the code that you see. And maybe we can then continue and come back to the question.
Okay, that's very great. The Class Dojo, I think, is mentioned also in one of the teaching scenarios. Actually, its use as an e-portfolio is not mentioned, so that's a good point. We do have a teaching scenario that suggests using an open source tool called Mahara. And in the toolkit, we tried to also give examples of open source and free tools, not just not paid ones, or even the free versions of commercial products. So Mahara, or even using something like OneNote of Microsoft, or I think there's an app called Book Creator as well. These I know are being used as e-portfolios. Thanks. And yeah, thank you for all the examples. Indeed, Canva, we just noticed yesterday that on Canva, you can even create a website. So that can be used as a visual storytelling app as well to create posters, presentations. If you haven't yet answered, thank you, Emma. And if you have, after this webinar, you can check the toolkit and let us know if you have any suggestions or questions. Right. Now, I would like to invite Janet Looney to present us with her implications for European policy. She's already here. Thank you. Hi, welcome.
Thank you. Shall I begin?
Yeah, I will remove this.
Okay.
Oops. Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you, Antoine, and thank you for the very interesting presentation that you've just made that gives a lot of shape and concrete ideas about how digital formative assessment can work. So now, as we're nearing the end of this webinar series, I'd like to zoom back out and look at the larger context of assessment learning work and the digital formative assessment approach, and provide an overview of two major relevant European frameworks. And so those are Pathways to School Success and the Digital Education Action Plan, which is now being implemented. So I'll start with Pathways to School Success. And although this is not a main emphasis on digital learning, it does set the tone for priorities for education across Europe. So this council recommendation was approved just last November. It will shape much of the European level work in school education in the next years. The priorities highlighted here continue and aim to deepen work that's already done and emphasize themes that have been central to the assessment learning approach. So as you see on this slide, the council recommendation emphasizes the importance of learner needs at the center, and digital formative assessment helps teachers to identify what those needs are and how they might respond to those. There's also an emphasis on supporting school leaders, teachers, trainers, and other staff to work with those learners and making sure the capacity is there. An emphasis on whole school approaches, as has been important to assessment learning throughout. And then, of course, the system level actions and resources that are needed for assessment for good school education. Assessment is also highlighted in the council recommendation. There's one direct reference, and it's an important one, and that is to promote assessment practices that reflect and support personal learning needs and paths, in particular by making extensive use of formative and continuous assessment and combining multiple digital and non-digital forms of tools. So those include portfolios, peer assessment, self-assessment, all of those things that we've been talking about, and that are inclusive and culturally responsive and participatory. Now, moving to the Digital Education Action Plan, which is for 2021 to 27, the first headline priority is to foster the development of a high-performing digital education ecosystem. The framework recognizes that although countries have different strategies and are at different stages of development, there are many opportunities for mutual learning, both between and among countries and also stakeholder groups. It addresses issues related to infrastructure, access, ethics, particularly in relation to the use of artificial intelligence and data, and content. These also are relevant to digital formative assessment. Digital education content, for example, is aligned with curriculum priorities. It is important for procurement policies in countries and the tools that schools have access to and how they're aligned with their priorities, and whether there's sufficient content in the national language, for example, as this is a major challenge that not everything should be in English, but it should be adapted for different country needs and curricular priorities. The second headline priority is enhancing the digital skills and competences for digital transformation. And this is, of course, something that's been very important for Assess at Learning, looking at common guidelines, and that can also include toolkits such as Assess at Learning, the competences and skills that are needed, and also the overall approach, and allowing teachers and school leaders and others to get digital skills certificates to advance their skills. So finally, the implications at national, regional, and school levels. So countries are at very different levels, at different stages of development, and have different strategies. And there are opportunities for mutual learning across Europe, so each country can advance its own strategy as needed. So within countries, there's the importance of aligning their own procurement of digital tools and infrastructure and of digital content and their investments in capacity building. Then sharing those at the European level and including opportunities for stakeholder dialogue and mutual learning. This can also inspire stakeholder dialogue and engagement at the national level. And here I'd like to emphasize that this means all stakeholders. So it's teachers, it's school leaders, it's students as well, as even at the policy level, students should have an important voice. And then finally, again, using tools like the Assess at Learning Toolkit as a jumping off point to inspire additional tools and guidelines to help with formative assessment in classrooms. And that includes both digital and non-digital. And those are the main points that we wanted to make in this kind of zoom out view. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot, Janet. It's interesting to see the development of national digital strategies of countries. I know many of them are entering a new cycle, and it's great to see in the Digital Education Action Plan that there is emphasis on equity, but also the use of artificial intelligence. I'm not sure what will happen with developments with such as ChatGPT, but we will see. I think the European Commission is also working on a response to that. And indeed, in the dialogue labs, we clearly saw the benefit of involving students as well and other educational stakeholders in the discussion of using data and formative assessment and other assessment topics. Thanks again. And if you have any questions for Janet, please let us know. And I think we can also now take a look at the answers in the poll. So I think we have some indeed answers. I see. Yeah, changing the pedagogical mindset is occurring multiple times actually. Yeah, this was also something mentioned in the toolkit, that a formative assessment is really about saying that I, I'm doing well, but I can always do better. And yeah, collecting information is a way to decide what can be done to improve. Yeah, a change of mindset is necessary. I can imagine that some actors could be reluctant to change. Yeah, I see ready scenarios again, and more time. These are also comments that occurred. It's interesting to see also these reoccur here. Any maybe policy level ideas? Yeah, willingness of understanding of parents, students. Yeah, creation of portfolios, feedback of work, indeed, and collaboration with other teachers. This is one thing we explored a bit, but we didn't really go into much detail. The point about creating teacher learning communities, how to run them. Maybe more examples could be explored in the toolkit. Even guidelines could be added. Very nice. Yeah. Mm, no, I still have trouble reading Greek alphabet, but I have colleagues that I can ask. Right? Yeah, I can see that the change in perspective, in mindset that occurs often, involving, well, the support of leaders and policymakers. Indeed, in this field trial, we didn't involve as many school leaders as teachers. It could be interesting to investigate what they think about the theory of change and the tools that we created for them. Yeah, thanks a lot for the many answers, and thanks a lot for the comments in the chat. I don't think there are any questions. There are many suggestions I see. I guess that's a good point. That's a good sign that there aren't many questions. Maybe it was clear. So I thank you all, and thanks, Janet, very much once more. I can slowly wrap this up. So some pointers, because I guess you might be curious where to find these things, is the toolkit is online on this link, which means you can explore these pages online, and you can also download scenarios and case studies as PDF files. But we also have the toolkit as an open educational resource pack, which means that we created the web pages as offline files. You can just download this package and you will get all the images, all the video links, and the PDF files that are used throughout the toolkit on your desktop in an offline way. And if there are tech-savvy people among you, if you have an ICT coordinator that would be interested in, let's say, including the toolkit on their website, on the school website, then that is also possible, because the package is free for use and it's also free for change and adaptation. You can even continue adding your own scenarios. You can edit the existing ones, and all the material is available in 6 languages, including English. And if you have any questions, any criticism, after all, this was a toolkit that we tested. There's always room for improvement, and we aimed at producing policy recommendations based on our experience of the toolkit. So you can email us, and you can also check out the project outcomes page on the website, where we will publish a report on the social impact on students of the project. And also there's a summary report that summarizes the findings from the field trials, and also a more detailed report on all the statistical methodology and the results of the policy experimentation. Oh, and finally, this wasn't officially part of the toolkit, but I highly recommend that you check our expert articles and newsletters, because there's a lot of interesting points there about formative assessment. So topics like, yeah, Violetta, unfortunately, Poland was not a partner in this project, and we didn't have Polish for this project, but we do have Polish in other projects. And maybe if you're interested, it's also possible to translate some things for these from the toolkit, because it's free to use. So some topics are, how to do formative assessment in remote teaching, how can school leaders support formative assessment. All these ideas are explored, and the newsletters feature many interviews about digital formative assessment. It talks about what's happening in terms of assessment and digital formative assessment in different countries. So you can find these on the news and articles page of the website. This concludes my part of the toolkit presentation. Now I can give the control back to Alex, maybe for a few closing words. Thank you very much once again for listening. Hope to see you in another place.
Thank you very much, Antoine, and thank you all for your comments in the chat. You can see, Antoine, that the presentation was liked very much by the audience. So it is my task now to wrap up the conference. So thank you very much, Antoine and Janet, for your contributions today. I'd like to get back to where we started with Assess and Learning, and why we started. We started the conference by recalling the context and the rationale for Assess and Learning, the fact that assessment is often considered or seen as a bottleneck for innovation and in education. Also the potential of digital assessment to facilitate system level change. The context of COVID-19 as well, when everything went online suddenly, and revealed how unprepared we were all in the world of education. We then looked at the Assess and Learning policy experimentation as a whole, and the results of the two work strands that we implemented in parallel. So with the randomized control trial with more than 200 schools for the quantitative evaluation of the impact of that systemic toolkit, which Antoine just presented, the impact on the adoption of digital formative assessment practices in schools, and the series of country and student dialogue labs for the qualitative evaluation of the social impact that digital formative assessment has on students. Today, we looked in detail at the toolkit and what it offers to school heads, to teachers, and to students, but also to parents and policymakers. We also looked at the how the toolkit and the results of the experimentation can be fed back into current European policy frameworks, and through that help to shape up national initiatives on digital formative assessment. So what did we learn? Well, we learned that the toolkit increases teachers' knowledge of digital formative assessment. It also increased awareness of DFA practices for teachers who had a low level of knowledge about digital formative assessment. But we also learned that the toolkit alone, even if systemic in nature, is not enough for schools to adopt DFA practices. What we learned from participants in the dialogue labs, and what we've seen also from your responses to that third question a few minutes ago, is commensurate to that. There are benefits to using digital formative assessment, and there are also challenges. There is a digital divide, which needs to be taken into account. There are skills and competencies in using digital tools for assessment that need to be built. And there is also the very powerful narrative of grades, of summative assessment, which requires changing our mindsets when it comes to assessment. So I think in concluding this conference, I would like to recall the, how can I say that? The human dimension of what we discussed during these hours together. We've talked about teaching, transmitting knowledge and experience. We talked about learning, and these are very human processes. Now, obviously, this takes place in schools, in the context of our education systems, with their similarities and their differences. But we're all human beings, and human beings learn and teach during their whole lives. So if we can use digital tools to improve the way we learn and teach, it's also an investment in the future. And I think it's with these words that I want to conclude. So thank you very much for participating in the final conference of Assess at Learning. I encourage you to visit the Assess at Learning website. You have the address on, which is currently scrolling at the bottom of your screen. You can download our reports. As I mentioned, on Wednesday, we will have the report on the social impact of digital formative assessment on students at the end of the month. But in the meantime, you can already look at an animated video that explains the results of the field trials, download the full evaluation report for the quantitative evaluation, and of course, use the toolkit, which was presented today, and download it as an open educational resource, put it on your own platform, on your school's website, for instance. So there are many things that you can do. So please go to the Assess at Learning website, and I hope you will enjoy reading the reports and using the toolkit. Thank you very much again for your participation, and goodbye.